Hi, welcome to the last video in section 3 where we are learning about networking, recycler views and fragments. So in the last video, we were able to build our network repository as well as the view model. And in this video, we will continue the app to show a simple customer list which is fetched over the network from a server. So first we'll be building our recycler view which will be hosted by a fragment, and the fragment is hosted by an activity. So to learn a little more about recycler view and how it works is, if you see our app, you can see that it is a list of names that are fetched from the servers. Now you might, looking at it at first, you might think that we'll be using, if there are 100 names, we'll be using 100 items of this layout, in this individual layout, and we will repeat it 100 times. But in actual, this is not what happens. We use either a list view, or in modern Android terms, we use recycler views, where each of these individual items is repeated only till the time that our screen is complete. So in this case, we will have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and maybe 10 items which are being recycled to show this UI. So at the top we have Russell White. So as soon as this layout containing Russell White goes out of the screen, recycler view will actually discard that view and move it to a recycler pool. And then once this Elaine Stewart comes in, the same view which was first holding Russell will now hold the values for Elaine. So the same view gets recycled, and that is where recycler view gets its name. So in our project, we will be using a fragment to initialize and provide the data for the adapter. This fragment will actually communicate with the view model, and the view model will communicate with the repository that we built in the last video. Now this adapter depends on certain things. So we will be passing the list of customers, which will act as the data or the source of truth for the adapter. Adapter will also interact with view holders that we will create. Now these are special classes which are defined by the adapter that will communicate, or they will hold references to the item layout. This item layout is the individual item layout using the name and the username that is shown in the UI. Now once the adapter gets the data, it will initialize view holders to create the views, and then it will call the bind methods to help the view holders set the data on the item. So maybe a little complex, but let us learn as we build it. So going back to our project, our view model is ready. Next thing that we need to do is first create a package for all our UI classes. So let us first create a UI package and then create a package for Fragment. Now for now, we only have one fragment, so you might want to skip on creating this package. But later, if you want to extend this app to maybe build a detailed view that comes after you click on one of the name, then maybe you will have a lot of fragments growing, and then suddenly your app will become unmanageable. So it is better to always structure your code beforehand. So we have the fragments, then we are going to create a new fragment. So for that, we'll not be creating a Kotlin file or class. We'll go down here and we will choose this fragment with view model. We will give the name called customer list fragment. This will also create a layout file for us. If you remember, the general convention is to have the type of the layout first. So we will do that, and we will also create a dummy view model class because it does not allow us to choose the view model class that we have already created. So if you see, the fragment has been created with some dummy code and also this view model class. Let us just delete it. Let us fix that thing. It will actually now point to the view model class that we have created earlier. Now, if you remember from section 2, we had used view binding. So we are going to use the same here. For that, go to the module level build gradle and add a new section called build features with view binding equal to true. Sync up your gradle and then it will get enabled. Now once view binding is enabled, we can now go back to our customer list fragment, and instead of inflating this layout from this inflator, we'll be using the binding method. But before we do that, let us go and define a recycler view in this fragment. Let us go to split view. We will remove this text view and this and just add our recycler view. Width and height would be match parent, and after that we will add an ID. So customer list recycler view. Okay, so coming back to our fragment, we will first have to create a binding variable which will point to our fragment layout. And then we will actually use this to inflate the view and pass it back in this method called Oncreate View. Now, if you remember from activity used to have some lifecycle methods. So every fragment has its own lifecycle. The first method that generally we override is the Oncreate View. This is where the layout file is inflated and the view is returned. So if you remember from activity, we just call set content view, but in a fragment, we actually return the view object. You can see there is also a callback which comes from the activity, which tells the fragment that the activity has now fully initialized and the UI is now visible. So the fragment can start working on its own view model or fetching any data and then start displaying it to the user. So let us complete our binding. It would be fragment customer list dot inflate. We will use the same inflator, container, and false. So we are just following the method which is written by default. And then instead of returning this inflator view, we will just return binding dot root. Okay, so our customer list fragment is now connected to the layout which has the recycler view. Now next we need to create one more layout item which is for the individual items. We'll just have a text view to hold the name and then another text view to hold the username. So come here in your left hand pane, open the resource view, then right click on layout and then say new layout resource file and name it item customer list. So if you remember, this is the same constraint layout. We will just add two text views. We will rename the ID. First will be customer name text view. Other will be customer username text view. Press tab and press on refactor. Now we will make the width as match parent. Okay. So let us now link it to the item container. So if you want to give some margin on the left and right hand side, you can give that using these here. And we will similarly link the username text view. Now we can give some margin between the name text view and the username text view. And We'll also give some top margin and some bottom margin so that there is some gap between each individual item. Now you can see it's not looking proper. The reason is that our constraint layout is match parent for height where it should be wrap contained. So now it looks better. We will also give some formatting. We will go to text appearance and choose display 1 for the username, and similarly for the username we will choose body 2. So you can play around with the style as you wish. This is what I have chosen. So our item layout is now ready. If you see the recycler view, this item layout is ready and the fragment is ready, which is ready to host the adapter. So now next thing we need is the view holder. So let us again go to our UI package and create a new package called UI.viewHolders, and then create a new Kotlin class. Which would be customer list view holder. So because we are using view binding, we will pass the binding here. We will use this item customer list binding, and this will actually extend the view holder class which comes from RecyclerView. This actually expects the view as a parameter in the default constructor. So we will just pass binding.root. Apart from this, we will define a method called bind, which the recycler adapter or recycler view will call to help this view binder, to help this view holder set the values on the item layout. So we will bind it to a individual customer, not the list of customer, but an individual customer object. So to make the binding visible, we will change it to val, and now we will have binding dot customer name text view dot text. So this is how we can set the text. But before we do that, let us create a string. For that, go to values under resource and go to strings.xml. Create a new string called customer name. And then if you remember, we'll be using the placeholders. So placeholder for string is %s. First %s is for first name and the next one is for the last name. So we'll be using the getString method, which is only available in context. We'll be using the context which is attached to the root. Customer name and then the two parameters, which are customer dot first name and customer dot last name. We will also set the value for the username. This is simple. We will just use customer dot username. So our view holder is also ready. Now we are slowly moving to the top where finally we'll be able to see the UI. So the next thing that we need is the recycler adapter. If you see, there is a warning here. So it will ask you to make it private. That is because nobody else is using this binding variable. So it is better to have all the member variables as private. Now go to UI, right click, new package called adapter, and then create a new Kotlin class called CustomerListAdapter. This will actually extend from RecyclerView dot adapter. Now here we need to already define the customer view holder. Now these generics are defined so that the so as soon as we define the customer list view holder at the top, we are able to auto generate all the methods that are required. So we will just use the default constructor. We will not be passing any values, but from our UI, we will pass the list of customers. And once we have the list of customers, it is very easy for us to fill up the values inside these methods. So item count is nothing but the size of the customers. And then when we want to create the view holder, we will have to initialize the layout first and then create an instance of the view holder class, customer list view holder, and then pass it back. So first thing we need is the inflator, which we can get using layout inflator dot from, and it needs the context which we can just pass from the parent. Next thing we need is the binding. So if you remember, we have created the customer list view holder which expects the binding in its constructor. So we'll be using customer list binding dot inflate inflator comma parent and false. And then finally we return customer list view. We finally return the customer list view holder and pass binding to its constructor. The third method is the bind view holder. Now at the start, when the recycler view is created, recycler view will get the count of items, which will help it create the number of list views or individual item views. And then for each individual item views which have to be rendered on the UI, it will create a pool by calling these methods repeatedly. So if the UI, if you remember, has to show 10 of the items, it will call this method 10 times to create a pool of these view holders. Now once the pool is created, it will start calling this bind method with the position so that we can actually map the view holder and the item which is corresponding to this position. So as we have created a bind method in our holder class, we will just call that with and pass that particular customer object. So with this, what we are doing is we are telling this view holder that you need to show the data corresponding to this customer object, which is at this position in the list of customers. So the same warning here, we can just make it private. Okay, spelling mistake. So with this, our adapter is also ready. Now, before we connect this adapter to the fragment, let us first create the container for the fragment itself. For that, let us go to the layout for activity. If you see, it only contains a text view. We are going to change it to a frame layout and add an ID called fragment container. We will use this frame layout at runtime to tell the Android that whatever fragment we are using, it has to be displayed in this container. You can also divide your UI such that you can have multiple fragments in the same screen. Now this functionality is generally used in tablets where you will have one list of customers and at the same time on the side you will have the details of the customers. Maybe you can take this as a challenge, and once we are done with simple list view, you can add another fragment to show the details of the customers. So let us go to main activity. If you remember, we are again using view binding. So let us replace this code so that we use the view binding. Binding is equal to activity main binding dot inflate. Okay. And instead of passing the layout, we will be passing the root view. Okay, so next thing that we need to do is create the fragment. So Android has already generated a utility method for us. If you go to this method, you can see it is part of the companion object, which means it is available at a static level, and it will help us create the fragment at runtime. So once the fragment is created, we will use the support fragment manager because this is an app compat activity. We will begin a transaction. We will begin the transaction and add the fragment in that particular container. And then commit the transaction. This commit is what is the method which will actually execute this transaction. We're using commit allowing state loss in the scenario that if the user suddenly closes his app or the app is killed, it won't cause a crash. So the last thing that is left is to connect the fragment and the adapter. So as you know, we have the view model ready, the recycler adapter is ready with the view holder and the item layout, but we have not connected the recycler view. So once the activity is created, there is a code to instantiate the view model. And then what we need to do is we need to tell the view model to start loading the customers. So once we load the customers, there is a method called observe. Now this takes two parameters. First is the lifecycle owner, which in the fragment is the view lifecycle owner. And the other one is an anonymous method, or you can just define a method here, which would be the callback method, which the view model will call once there is a change in the live data. Okay, so we have imported the live data. So our iteration, we can rename it as customers, so it is easy for us to understand. Now that we have the list of customers, we can initialize our adapter, which would be customer list adapter, which takes the list of customers. Then, if you remember, we are using view binding, and it will have a reference to our recycler view. We will attach our adapter to the recycler view. So this is not enough. We need to do one more thing. We need to tell the recycler view what kind of layout manager to use. So we'll be using linear layout manager because we just want the items to be listed one after the other in a linear vertical fashion. So we'll just use the linear layout manager. So it is done. Now most of the things are ready. Let us just run it and see whether it works or not. So at a high level, if we want to revise, we have an activity which contains a fragment container where we instantiate and load the fragment. We have a fragment which has references to view model as well as the recycler view. The recycler view contains references to view holder and the item layout through which the UI is mapped. On the other hand, the view model holds references to the network repository, which internally uses Retrofit to fetch the JSON response from the server. So nothing happened. I think something went wrong. So let us try to debug it. So the fragment is getting instantiated and it is also added. So we can see that the response is unsuccessful. So there is some problem in the JSON file. So one thing that I have done is I have named it as customer.json. While if I go to the URL, it is actually customers.json. So this is just to show you how to debug. So if you can see, everything was there in our logcat because we had put proper logs. So let us now run it again. So you can see now the response is successful and we are able to see the list of all the customers with their name and username. So this is it from section 3 as well as the course point of view. This is not the end for your learning. You can always pick up Google projects and GitHub projects and see how people have coded their simple apps and look around. This course was designed to give you a very solid foothold to start learning on Android on your own and to also get a job in corporates for a starting level Android engineer. With this knowledge that you have learned in this course, you will easily be able to follow all the code that is written by other senior developers in the Android projects, and you will also be easily able to find bugs and fix them up easily. So hoping that you enjoyed the course and you learned a lot, please leave your feedback in the comments and let me know how it went for you. If you have any issues, you can always get back to us and we will try to solve them as soon as possible. Thank you for your time and thank you for watching.